Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Steve Johnson, and today I will be discussing 10 common REBT errors or mistakes with examples and actually quick fixes, or I hope relatively quick fixes for these common errors. Before I get started, I especially want to welcome the members of the Psychotherapy Education and Training YouTube channel. Without your generous donations, I would not be able to produce such programs, as well as an upcoming certificate program in marriage and family. So I hope you will join the channel and be able to earn that certificate program. Today, I want to walk through 10 common mistakes that even some of the most experienced REBT therapists make, and actually, much more importantly, how to fix them relatively quickly and effectively. These can be subtle errors that don't even appear to be errors. They don't look like mistakes at first, but they can quietly limit progress in therapy and effectiveness of the excellent interventions that you may be planning for your clients. So for each one, I will give the error or the mistake, kind of a quick example for that. We can amplify that if you would like for me to do that. Just make a comment, and when I am done, I will address those comments as best I can and open it so others can help do the same. So I will discuss the error, give a quick example, and kind of a practical fix that you may be able to use immediately with your client. So I hope that's something that you're interested in. Let me take a look at error number one, and that is failing to identify inferences before beliefs. Before I get to that, let me describe the difference in REBT between inferences and beliefs. And this is, for new REBT therapists, this can be a challenge. It's not a difficult concept, but it may be a new concept for you, particularly within the context of psychotherapy. Both inferences and beliefs are kinds of thinking. Inferences are the type of thinking that attribute meaning to a situation or event or a state of affairs. Whereas a belief doesn't introduce meaning or attribute meaning to those situations or events, but they evaluate that. And we want within REBT, when we're working with a client, to identify both the inferences or the meanings that they give to situations, and even more importantly, the beliefs that they have about those situations or events. So failing to identify the inferences would be one really common mistake. And it involves jumping over the inferences or jumping over the consideration of the inferences to right straight to the beliefs without clarifying what the client's inferences are. Here's a short example. Let's say that a client says that they feel anxious at work. You discover that the client holds the belief that they must be perfect at work, or that they have to perform well at work at all times perfectly, right? And so you move to disputing that I must perform well. Now that seems logical and within tune with the general gist of what REBT is about. However, underneath, the client might hold the inference that, my boss thinks I'm incompetent. Now that's important. That inference may significantly set the stage for the emotion. And if we ignore it, we miss a significant thought held by the client that could radically impact our therapy. Here's a relatively quick fix to this issue. We might ask, what are you telling yourself is happening or will happen? That may help us get to the inference. Always clarify the inference before disputing the belief. That is very, very important, especially if that inference pops up in different domains of life. But we will get to that issue a little bit later. Error number 2 is not checking beliefs across the domains of the client's life. Let me say that again. Error 2 is not checking the beliefs of the client across the different life domains of that particular client. What do we mean? There could be the personal domain, there could be interpersonal domain, educational, professional, recreational, religious. We have all kinds of different domains. And it's really important for us to check the beliefs across those domains, not just within one domain. The client may bring in one domain, and we will certainly address that, but not checking the beliefs across the domains of life. That particular belief across domains of life could be problematical. We would miss something really important. We sometimes treat beliefs as situation specific, and that is okay to some degree. But instead, it might be a global belief across all domains of life. More often or not, it's not global as across it, but it would be maybe across more than one domain of life. So it could be within one domain of life. It could be global across all domains of life, or some domains of life and not other domains of life. It is important to know that, because when we're cognizant of that, then we can shift to the other domain to help them with that domain of life, just in case they don't generalize the treatment within one domain of life. I hope that's clear. If you have questions, feel free to ask those questions. For example, a client believes that their spouse must always like them within their marriage. Well, not really very realistic. I've been married for 40 years, and often there will be times that come up when she doesn't really like me so well and I'm not liking her. Love, yeah, but like, maybe not. And having that demand may not be really, really helpful. But we might find that the same belief for that client shows up at work and socially outside of work and outside of marriage. And we don't explore that. If we don't, we would miss that this is a belief that is functioning as a life theme more than just an isolated belief, and could negatively impact significant portions of their life. So it's really important that we look to see whether that belief is functioning across those life domains. A quick fix here is ask quite simply, and this is what I love about REBT, we don't have to make things complicated. We could simply ask, where else does this belief show up in your life? Give them time to think about that. Excuse me. Because what we're aiming for is philosophical change across and behavioral across all domains of life, not just situational relief, but relief across all domains. Third is missing core demands. Now, it is important to understand what kinds of cognitions we deal with in REBT, and we categorize those beliefs into different types. One is demandingness, which is the core belief within REBT. Albert Ellis said, cherchez le demand. Look for the demand, because the demand will either be explicit or implicit, and it is our task as REBT therapists to find the functional demand there, okay? What is functioning as a demand, excuse me. And then in English, a demand typically contains words like should, ought, must, have to, and need. Now, don't assume that those words mean that there's a demand. You always have to check with the client whether they're holding those as demands. The other sets of beliefs are what we call derivatives. And there are three types of derivatives. These are beliefs that accompany those demands. Of course, again, the demand is the core belief. The derivatives are awfulizing or catastrophizing, as our CBT friends say, that this is terrible, this is horrible, this is an utter catastrophe. This is 100% as bad as it possibly could be. In addition, there could be frustration intolerance. In the literature, older literature, they may have called it low frustration tolerance. We tend not to use that phrase anymore, but we tend to call it frustration intolerance. Clark, in his wonderful book, SOS Help for Emotions, refers to this as I can't stand it itis. I can't stand this. This is too much. This is overwhelming. That would be another typical belief. Clients will, when you ask for emotions, will sometimes say they're overwhelmed. Technically, that's not an emotion. That is a cognition. We don't necessarily correct them on that, but at least in our mind, we know that that's a dysfunctional belief. And then the last category, and it's a tremendously important category of beliefs, is global negative rating. Of what? Global negative rating of the self, of others, of life, the world, and it could be a demand even about our thinking. We may think, I should not even have that thought. That would be a global negative rating of your own cognition. So a mistake here is staying at the surface level evaluations, evaluating derivatives, and failing to consider the core demand or demands of the client. Remember, in REBT, those demands are core beliefs, and that they do occur in a conjunction with those other beliefs called derivative beliefs. The example I want to give here is that let's say that the client says, this is awful. This is absolutely awful. And we work at that level, but we never bother uncovering what the demand might be. The demand might be, this must not happen. So they present with, this is awful, but we, as therapists, we stop there. We abdicate our responsibility of checking out all the beliefs, and we know that there will be explicitly or implicitly a demand, so we need to begin to go after that. So a quick fix for forgetting that is really, really quite simple. And we would say, is this a preference or is it a demand? And asking that simple question can help us get to the demand quite easily without going into a long didactic explication of what we're talking about. Then help the client shift to something like, I strongly prefer this, but I don't absolutely need it. So that would be a more adaptive alternative belief to the demandingness, the core demand. I hope that is clear. The next error that I want to consider in this short presentation, error 4, is an overemphasis on insight without practice. Now, this is a very, very important error to address because it gets at the heart of what REBT is about and how it differed with some of the therapies that came before it historically. And so keep in mind, REBT is not an insight therapy. I really should say REBT is not a insight-only therapy. It is interested in insight, but it's not insight only, and for very, very good reason. Insight alone is not enough to help clients make significant changes in their cognitions in life. REBT, as I said, it does include insight, but it moves beyond insight alone to behavioral change in addition. So for example, let's say a client fully or seemingly fully understands their thinking in session, but let's say that the therapist doesn't have them practice the skill within the session. That is essential for change. The result is often that the client spends, for example, the entire week avoiding maybe something difficult, maybe a difficult conversation they're avoiding because they didn't practice moving the corrected cognition into behavior. So we need to have the clients practice the behavior repeatedly. So nothing changes. A quick fix on that is always assign between session practice. Often in some of the REBT books, some of the great REBT books, they will focus on behavioral homework rather than just cognitive work. So often in the session, we'll work on cognitive stuff. We should also be working on behavioral. But if you're working on largely on cognitive stuff, then it is imperative that you have some behavioral homework to work on there. So behavioral tasks might count, coming up with rational statements, short coping statements, or one way that I like is to use rational emotive imagery. And if you go to my YouTube channel, Psychotherapy, Education, and Training, I have a video or two on how to perform rational emotive therapy. It is a tremendously helpful tool, intervention to help clients change from dysfunctional emotions to more practical, functional emotions. So that would be really, really helpful. If there's no practice, progress is going to be very, very limited, and progress may be quite slow and incomplete. Let's consider error number 5, and that's neglecting emotional processing that's too cognitive. Now, I will just be quite honest. I'm not great. I'm not a big fan of using the phrase processing emotions. I think it's way too imprecise. I know I have my students, sometimes they'll say, what would you do with this client? And they would say, help them process their emotions. I go, let's be really concrete. And what do you mean by process emotions? What would you have them do? And what would you help them do that you're labeling very vaguely as processing and emotions? Sometimes we think that the client may know what we mean. They may not. And partly because we use jargon or we're vague, when it would be better if we dialed down the jargon and we were precise in what we're asking for. So let's look at this error. And so sometimes, here's the problem. Sometimes therapy becomes too intellectual. Some people mistakenly think that because REBT begins with the word rational, that we're all about rationality and nothing else. But finish the name of the therapy, Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy. We're interested in rationality. We're interested in emotions. We don't neglect emotions, they're tremendously important. And we're also looking at behaviors. So and because the emotions, the behaviors, and the cognitions, beliefs are intertwined, and if we make changes in one, we can increase making changes in the others. So let's not let REBT therapy become too or overly intellectual, because that is a distortion of what the model is really, really about. We do want rationality. Here's an example. Let's say a client can explain their beliefs, the beliefs that they hold, both functional and dysfunctional. They can explain them perfectly. However, but they still feel intense anxiety in real situations. So explaining something is not the same as effectively dealing with something. So these are two kinds of skills. A quick fix here might be use rational emotive imagery. As I mentioned before, have them imagine the situation vividly, the situation in which they experience a dysfunctional negative emotion. Imagine it, get in touch with whatever the dysfunctional emotion was. As soon as they feel that dysfunctional negative emotion, stop. And then they engage in part 2. Visualize the same situation, but this time, as a therapist, we would say, try to make yourself feel a functional negative emotion. So if the dysfunctional negative emotion is anxiety, let's try to feel concern. If it's depression, let's try to make ourselves feel some sadness, but not depression. If it's rage, let's help feel some frustration or maybe annoyance. Okay, so these are not just they're not just words or labels. They're actually different because the cognitions that give rise to them are quite different. So, two parts to rational emotive imagery. Both parts begin with visualizing the same situation. Part one, visualize it, try to experience the dysfunctional negative emotion, then stop. Part two is visualize the same situation, this time experience the helpful negative emotion and stop. At that point, we ask the client, what change did you make within yourself so you experience the functional negative emotion rather than the dysfunctional negative emotion? And then we assign that to do daily for quite some time until they are efficient at transforming the dysfunctional negative emotion to a functional negative emotion. It's quite good intervention to have clients do. And then you have them repeatedly practice that new belief emotionally, not just cognitively. So we don't want to be overly cognitive. Of course, we're going to dispute the beliefs and have them do cognitive restructuring and replace those dysfunctional beliefs with functional beliefs. But we also go in and, especially when clients say, I know it, but I don't feel it. Well, often through practice and focusing on changing the emotion, that helps them not only get it, grasp it intellectually, but feel it emotionally, etc. Okay, I hope that's helpful. Let's look at error number 6, which I call focusing on avoidance goals instead of approach goals. This is very, very important and often not talked about much. What's the difference between an approach goal and an avoidant goal? An avoidant goal is something that you want to avoid. Let's say you have anxiety about driving over bridges. An avoidant goal would be not to drive over bridges. An approach goal would be drive over the bridge. First, we could do maybe drive over very short bridges and then move it up to very long bridges. But we would approach something rather than avoid it, right? Often with anxiety, the behavior that's associated with anxiety is avoidance. And it makes sense. The things that we make ourselves anxious about, we tend to want to avoid. The problem is if we avoid, we increase the anxiety over time, whereas if we approach it, doesn't mean we have to rush and conquer it completely. Some people do. That's called flooding. But some people want to take it a step by step. That's okay too. But the thing is to frame these goals around approach rather than avoidance. Often we frame goals around reducing discomfort. That's not REBT. So for example, if a client says, if they have anxiety and we say, what would your goal be? They would say, I would like to lower the anxiety. In REBT, we would need to have a discussion and negotiate that, because to avoid or to lower the anxiety means that they still have the anxiety. It isn't as strong. However, they still have the dysfunctional beliefs that cause anxiety. So the anxiety will come back up again. So instead of doing that, replace the anxiety, which means replace the cognitions that caused the anxiety. I hope that's clear. If there aren't, then we can talk about that. Let's take an example of this. Let's say the client says, I just want to feel less anxious. That's common. But that, unfortunately, keeps the focus on avoidance. And there are consequences for that. If we avoid in different domains of life, if we have that same kind of belief and that same kind of avoidance, then the life becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and more uncomfortable and less enjoyable. So having an approach goal rather than an avoidance goal is quite helpful. Research shows that those individuals that have primarily avoidance goals tend to have higher anxiety and higher depression. Albert Ellis said, the goal of psychotherapy is to accept reality as it is without unduly disturbing yourself about it. And so we want to move beyond the avoidance goals, okay? Quick fix on this is easy. Shift to approach goals. And we can do this by asking things like, what do you want to move toward? Even if anxiety is present, what would be helpful for you to move toward rather than avoid? Another one, this reconnects therapy to action and meaning, which is really, really, really important. Not avoid life. We want people to enjoy life, face life, and move, and transcend avoidance. The seventh error is not linking values to therapy goals. A lot of REBT therapists kind of don't include this. I think it's essential to include this as an important aspect of REBT. Our goals can become mechanical if they're not tied to values. The client is just doing things. But if it's not tied to a value and they don't see that they're moving towards something that they intrinsically value to them, then they may not be as motivated. But if we tie the goal to something that the client values, I just did this yesterday with some clients, and I did it in supervision yesterday with some of my graduate students in psychotherapy, and some of them were not incorporating goals in there. As soon as they incorporated goals in the therapy sessions that I was supervising, they saw a big change because the clients were a bit more motivated. And I saw a big change in my students' way that they were doing REBT. And it was quite rewarding to see, because we don't want those goals to be mechanical. We want them to have life. And if we tie it to the client's values, then they are much more motivated, okay? Let's take an example along those lines. Let's say a client wants to work on reducing conflict, okay? Now that sounds on the surface. The trouble is we never clarify that they deeply value connection or honesty. If we knew that, we could have a better kind of establish better goals with them. When we establish goals, we are collaborating with the client in the establishment of goals. We don't give them the goals and say, these are healthy goals. We work with the client. We establish with them some healthy goals, and we try to approach goals rather than avoiding goals. Now, some exceptions to that. We don't rigidly hold to that idea. In the beginning of treatment of substance use disorders, we may have them, particularly if they've just come out of detox and they're in early rehab, we may have them have avoidance goals, right, initially until they build up resilience. But eventually we want to switch over to approach goals and not just have avoidance goals, because the life of the individual with the SUD becomes really, really small and unhelpful. A quick fix on this one might be something like ask, why does this matter to you? Once we ask why this matters to them, then we're talking about values. Then explicitly connect values to goals and behaviors, okay? Let's look at the error number 8, and that is dismissing meaningful client experiences. Now, with England, I did an English group. I did a whole series of videos on this. I call it the supra-rational, and I'll be giving a lecture on campus on April 17th on just this topic, because I think in therapy, sometimes we've neglected this kind of issue because it seems a little woo-hoo and not as objective as we would think. But we can help make it objective and actually help clients by facing it. Again, the error would be dismissing meaningful client experiences. Sometimes I use the word encounter rather than experiences. Either way is fine. So sometimes therapists kind of unintentionally dismiss what matters most to clients. They bring in something and we just don't realize how important and significant it is to the clients. Let's say, for example, a client describes feeling calm after they prayed. Now, we don't promote or demote prayer in sessions, particularly if you're secular therapists, or if a client wants prayer and says they want it, then that's a different topic. But we can't do it if they don't bring it up, because that would be imposing our values upon them, and there is no place for that in psychotherapy. But we want, if the client raises some kind of response to prayer, they may see it as an answer to prayer or whatever. We may not endorse what they're saying, right? We don't have to endorse the metaphysics or the ontology of what they're saying, but we can endorse that they had some experience or encounter that was tremendously important to them. And if we move past that as irrelevant, that is not helpful. That can cause disruption in the therapy. Excuse me. A quick fix, and again, I elaborate on this in some videos on the YouTube channel. A quick fix is explore it. Explore that experience. We can ask questions like, what does that experience mean to you? And did it add to the quality of life? If it did, how did it change the quality of life for you in that moment, or even if it had a lasting effect? We're not asking about whether the prayer is real or not and they're in touch with the divine. We are asking a very relevant psychological issue that could impact the psychotherapy for that client. And that could be quite helpful to them. And we would do it, again, in a quite rational, empathic way. Or what values do you hold and how might they help you change? Okay? Help change your thoughts. Help change your behaviors. What perceived threat in your life impacts how you view situations? Do you tend to have some perception of threat? What form does it take? And how does that impact you? And how could your values help you in that, right? I've had clients bring in that they've listened to a piece of music and it just took them to another place that was kind of pleasant. And, in therapy, we may call those the kind of glimmer moments in which things feel right. And then we can explore that with the client. It may help us say, you know what, you had this experience. Wonder if you tried having, introducing music at certain times for which you had experiences like that. How might that add enrichment to your life, etc.? Let's consider it or not. Okay. So, all kinds of things that we could do. What would happen if you tried acting as if you weren't anxious? What would happen then, right? What would happen if you raised that experience up, that encounter that you had at choice times? What might that add to your enjoyment in the moment, etc., right? Extend the pleasant experience that the individual had. Okay. Hope some of those are questioned, because these moments can be powerful kind of therapeutic resources. The brain looks for threat and resources, and it really does a good job at looking at threat. It will perceive threat even if there is no threat. Why not help clients see resources that they've experienced and see those resources something that they can incorporate into their life in healthy, non-demanding ways. Okay? Let's look at mistake or error number 9. This is ignoring secondary disturbance. Excuse me. So what would this mean? For those of you who are experienced REBT therapists, we would have the ABC model, right? A, activating event, B, beliefs and inferences, C, emotions, behaviors, and physiological responses. What if our physiological response actually becomes our new activating event? And then we have beliefs about that physiological response, and we have emotions about that. Or let's say, an individual ABC, the C would be anxiety. And then they have, I must not be anxious. And then they get angry about being anxious. The anger would be a secondary symptom. In REBT, what do we do with this? Well, one is do not avoid or, fail to consider the secondary emotion. Often we focus on the primary emotion exclusively, or always focus on it first. For example, a client feels anxious about something, but they also feel ashamed of being anxious. They think, I should be over this, etc. I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't feel anxiety. And so then they have an emotion about their anxiety. The emotion about the anxiety is the secondary symptom, okay? And it is important to look at both. That second layer intensifies. That second layer intensifies the problem, right? Quick fix would be ask, how do you feel about your feeling this way? How do you feel about your anxiety? Do you have any emotions about the fact that you're anxious? And they go, you know what? I'm angry, or I get depressed. So those are secondary symptoms. We want to analyze both of those using the ABC model within REBT. It is really, really important that we do that. The question is how, right? The question is, how do we do that? Well, we would run a second ABC model on that. And however, ask the client whether they would like to work on the anxiety or the shame first. It's important that we collaborate with the client rather than dictate what the client should work on first or second, third, or whatever. Collaborate with the client, have them decide on whether they want to work on the primary or the secondary emotion, but work on both, okay? In the old days, way back when I was starting REBT, we would say always work on the secondary symptom first. No longer, we would leave it to the client, and they could say, I think it'll be easier if I work on this one. They might say, it's easier to work on the secondary one. Okay, do you want to work on that one first? Yeah, and then we would do that. Let them choose. That gives them agency. Error number 10 is weak or ineffectual or ineffective disputation of the unhelpful, or what we sometimes call irrational beliefs. Finally, disputation can be way too weak. And Albert always said, do strong, pointed disputation focus. For example, let's say we gently question beliefs that the individual has, overly gently treating it like kid gloves, okay? And I know some therapists are afraid of challenging, but they may be so gentle that they never really challenge the client's logic or the usefulness of their belief. So this doesn't mean, believe me, and don't think that it does, this does not mean that we should be loud, pushy, or rude. It means that we help the client learn how to actively, not rudely, not pushy, but actively challenge their dysfunctional beliefs from very different angles and very different styles. So one quick fix is strengthen the disputation in several ways. Empirically, where's the evidence for your dysfunctional belief? Logically, does this belief make sense in any way? Pragmatically, is this belief helping you or harming you? Is this belief helping you reach your desired life goals, or are they inhibiting you in their attainment? Or friendship dispute. Friendship, if you had a friend who thought this way, what would you say to the friend? A quick note on this one. It is typically not helpful to use the friendship dispute if the emotion under consideration is anger. Under anger. Why is that the case? Often someone who is angry focuses more on being justified in their anger than whether their anger is helpful. Thus, they may support the friend's anger and the friend's anger-producing thoughts. We already have one person with a dysfunctional emotion. We don't want them lobbying with the friend with a similar kind of anger-producing thought. These are common errors. All of these errors are common. And it's not the end of the world if you make these errors, but it is important. We want to maximize the effectiveness or the efficacy of the work that we do with clients and help them as best we can, okay? And although these may be common errors, they are completely fixable. There are easy, straightforward ways that we can do it. It may not be immediate. We may have to repeat them. And honestly, we need to keep our own thoughts rational and helpful. And if we experience unhelpful negative emotions, then we need to take time and dispute it or talk to, a good friend who can help us get over that so that we model healthy beliefs and healthy emotions with our clients. But you know why? What REBT is not just about thinking differently. It's about helping clients wherever they are. We want them to develop flexibility. We want them to be more reality-based and to be more value-driven and have a value-driven philosophy of life. I was mentored by Albert Ellis, and I'm very, very grateful for that. And several times I heard him say that the goal of psychotherapy is to accept reality as it is without unduly disturbing the self about it. But that has to be understood correctly and what Al really meant with that. This doesn't mean that we always like all aspects of reality, but it does mean that if we accept them, not avoid them, then if we accept that this is the way reality is, that is a first step toward taking the responsibility to help the client, challenging it more rationally and experience more helpful emotions, including those helpful negative emotions that will help them. Okay. If you can catch these mistakes in your own work, that would be really, really helpful. I try to do the same. You will see your effectiveness increase quickly in your work with your clients. I thank you for being here, and I'm happy to take your questions at this time. So if you have any question, then just let me know. I did have someone say it's about what, but I don't quite know what you were talking about. So if you want to share what you were thinking, feel free to ask that question or any other question right now. Just make a comment and I can address it. If no comment, we'll call it a day, and I hope you found some of this really, really helpful for you. In addition, feel free to join the Psychotherapy Education and Training YouTube channel, because if you do, then I'm going to be having some other things that will be coming up. I will be posting some worksheets that you can use in working with married couples or couples, married or not, that they may find very, very helpful. So feel free to do that. Someone says, thank you. I want to thank you. It's a Saturday, and it was really nice of you to take some time off on a Saturday to come in and just try to improve your REBT. So I deeply appreciate that. And as I appreciate all my REBT colleagues, and we work together to improve our therapy. But again, feel free to join the REBT, not REBT, but the Psychotherapy Education and Training YouTube channel that I run. And if you do, I will be sending you, you'll have first look at some of the videos that I create. We're going to have some free get-togethers to kind of walk through an actual therapy session and look at the parts of it, which would be helpful for new therapists or maybe even some older therapists. And like I said, I have some interventions that I will be sharing with those of you who become members of that channel. I don't have any other comments, so thank you all very, very much, and I hope to see you at another program very, very soon. Goodbye, and have just